other artist's friend. But yeah, I started collecting actually. First piece I bought was in 1989, actually. And I was talking to someone the other day about this, that it was, I think it was actually the start of collecting. So not only did I buy one painting, but I went back a few weeks later and bought actually another painting by exactly the same artist. So I think that probably is the direct at least a definition of collecting, going out and not just acquiring one piece to put on the wall, but actually starting to look at some of the scenes and doing that. So where it all came from was, at least my interest in contemporary art was really started around growing up in Britain in the 70s and early 80s, really being into films, fashion, literature, music, just going out and trying to be hip. And around that time, you're watching TV, you'd see some of the New York artists, Andy Warhol and Keith Haring, and that seemed like a pretty hip thing to do. A lot of the musicians that I like, David Bowie, Brian Ferry, were also into fine art and contemporary art. And so again, I thought, well, that seems like if I want to be hip, this is something that I have to do. And if you pretend to like something and be interested in something for long enough, it sort of creeps up on you, right? So that was, I came into contemporary art that way. But also, very, very interested in things. So as you quite rightly said, early 90s was a pretty cool place to be in London. It was all the YBAs, the Damien Hirst, Sarah Lucas, Gavin Turk. So that was really the earliest part of my collection. I then, at the late 90s, became very friendly with a fantastic gallerist who I know I'm lucky enough to call one of my closest friends, Sadie Coles. It's in the fair here, and a lot of my early collecting was around her program. That's around the time she started. She started her gallery. I then moved to New York in the 90s, so I then started to develop a bit of an international flavor to the collection, and moved to Hong Kong almost 9 years ago now, actually. And that's where I really started to focus and do a bit more on Asian art. So it's been quite organic. And quite addicted. I mean, that's another thing as well. I think collectors tend to be, pretty impulsive or compulsive. Another thing someone said to me the other day was collectors don't tend to collect one thing. The art collectors will also collect books, or they may collect watches, or they may collect wine, or what have you. That's the same with me. I like a lot of different things.
And Shay, of course, you have been a collector of moving image and video art. And we'd just love to hear more about the Acolyte collection, which was made public nearly 2 years ago. And we'd just love to hear more about, what was really the decision behind that to kind of make that public, and why did you have such passion for collecting video art?
Yeah, it was, and I would encourage all of you, if you haven't seen it, you look at my name and then collection, Acolyte collection. You can see it on Instagram and, more importantly, the website. And we're also bringing that to life in a couple of places in Hong Kong over this week. So, we're taking something that is, really quite intimate and quite private and quite lonely in some respects. For those of you that haven't bought a piece of video art, what you'll tend to get delivered is a little USB stick. Or sometimes not even that, like the URL, right? So, it could be a pretty lonely pastime. And actually what I did not start doing was collecting moving image work. That was never the intention. I collected a lot of different work, a lot of different mediums from, great artists. Some of that happened to be moving image work. So I think one of the first works I had was something by a British artist called Mark Leckey called Ferici Made Me Hardcore. He's an artist that works across the medium. Fishley Weiss, a great Swiss art combo that made some great work. Some of that happened to be moving image, and so on and so forth. So really the moving image was just originally just part of a broader collection. And then I think it was Ashlyn Sabi at one point. She said, hey, you know what? You've actually got a really important moving image collection. And that's when I started to think about that being something by itself. and then started to think about, well, what does it really mean to collect moving image work? And that's where the Actoroid collection came from. It was, how do we make something available that normally is quite intimate, and I mean that not just in a public sense, but also from my perspective. If you buy one of Wildby's wonderful photographs, you put it on the wall at home and you can see that every day, and you can enjoy that. But that's not necessarily the case with most moving image work. And so the key word was available. And then I started, to speak to a lot of gallerists, a lot of artists, a lot of friends, more conceptually about that. How do you kind of do that and move that and push it forward? And that's the whole intention of that Actoroid collection. So it is the only public part of my collection. It's about 15%, so it's definitely not the majority of the work. But I've been lucky enough to speak to some very, some important now moving image artists, but also some big collectors like the Kramliks in San Francisco. Spend some time with them thinking about, well, how do we really push this forward as a medium? And so it's as much an intellectual exercise as it has actually building that great collection. But it's sort of taken on a bit of a life of its own at the moment.
And Rory, you have been a practicing multidisciplinary artist for 25 years. How would you describe your creative power?
Wow. Yeah, too early to give a talk, but yeah. At this stage, after 25 years of pushing through contemporary art with a medium that I've chosen, which is not painting and not sculpture. And I would like to think that I've only arrived at this with the support that I, managed to through thick and thin, through my gallery and through my patrons. Because photography is just something that, I would say I'm one of the last dinosaurs in contemporary art to be sticking to it like 25 years and after. So that at this point, I don't look at photography as a medium. It is through my practice that it's filtered through. So now, let me just summarize the 25 years. I would like to say that I've arrived at more clarity in the work, and also my position as a Southeast Asian contemporary artist, navigating the transnational conversations. Yeah.
At Warrior Itsu this year alone, as I mentioned, you have a survey show with Silent in New York, show at Shanghai, and also help Basel from Harmony. What's it mean for you at the moment to be able to show your work in so many different corners of the world?
It's very interesting because the work that I do is very open-ended, and every place that I show, the context seems to shift and change because each image has different codes within it. It's like playing riddles with the audience. So with the audience here in Hong Kong might be different if I've shown it elsewhere. The recent show that I've opened in Shanghai also, of course, is the new frontier for me, and I was surprised to receive such an open curiosity. And then so to me, I'm very interested as well as how the work evolves through time. Yeah.
And so I would love to know when your passion for collecting first turned into one of supporting.
Pretty early on. I first started physically going out and supporting shows rather than buying work in the around 2000s, around 25 years ago. And at that point, it was, again, I forgot who said it to me, but someone were talking about a show or an institution. They said, look, this work does not show itself. Right? Someone's actually got to pay for this. And I think that was, that was important. I think I took that on board fairly early on. First thing I think I supported, actually was even earlier than that, was the ICA in London. There was an Edmund called Philip Dodds that ran that back in the day. I can't remember when that was, but I remember receiving the first letter saying, can you give us, you probably know when that was due. I don't know what it was, but can you give us a few grand and help the ICA? Very soon after that, there were the whole series of shows of the Chismahel Gallery. I remember Nan Goldin was one, Mark Wallinger was one, and I supported those, Christine Iglesias, it was all around the same time. So that when that first happened, actually, funding in that sense, And again, that was just in the notion of helping these things happen, of where does this happen on their own. But of course, another way of supporting, the art market and art and artists generally is actually buying the work, right? So I guess even before, there was that writing a check for receiving nothing, by going out and buying the work is probably, the easiest and the best way of support.
And Shane, how would you assess the current state of the art ecosystem?
Jeez. How long we got? I don't know. I mean, it's it's complicated. Well, complicated. I was talking to Huawei and about this a few weeks ago, and also Huawei's gallerist earlier this morning. The art ecosystem is really, my view on that is it's a function of three different things. You've got of course the artists themselves. In terms of participants, you've got the galleries, whether they're public or private, and you've got the collectors. I spent a lot of time thinking about kind of how those three parts of the art world, art market, actually function. And I think different, obviously, but equal importance potentially you can assign to all of them. The world's kind of changed a lot, even since I've been collecting. But over the last 25, 30 years, the amount of art that's being produced has gone up exponentially. And someone could probably quote some numbers on that, but it's been very, very, very significant. Just the nature of the works, the size of works, the production cost of those works has also gone up exponentially. And as has the ambition, obviously, of a lot of the artists, and shipping and insurance and everything else. So there's been a huge supply there. I think as part and parcel of that, I'm not kind of sure what came first, but also we've had an exponential rise in contemporary art galleries, and also art fairs, and then to some extent, obviously, collectors as well. But there has been a very, very significant increase in in actually what is being produced, where it's being shown, and therefore the amount of money that's needed to support that, right? And I just think, and maybe we can dig into it, we've got time a bit later on, but growing in its current form, I don't think can be sustainable. And there was one talk I went to, I can't remember where it was, I think it was Mark Spiegel at the weekend, was talking about how, if you look at contemporary art sales, actually while other markets and not that I view it as a market, but over the last 20 years have gone up, contemporary art sales have really been relatively flat, right? And so I think what we are looking at the moment is probably a period of transition, or at least stability, where the sort of demand and supply have got to sort themselves out. I think we had a bit of a balance. And I think one thing that's going to really mean that's an even more important conversation is when my generation of collectors are no longer the most important part of that system, right? What happens to is it Gen X, Gen Z, or millennials that really have a very, very different view of, owning stuff and particularly collecting. So I think we are going for a period of, transition and hopefully stabilization that comes at the end of a, very significant 30-year boom.
And Shane, how can patrons help support a sustainable ecosystem, and how to know which projects are worth funding or financing?
Well, sustainability in that sense, and we talked a little bit about that, it's nothing to do with carbon footprint or being green, and of course they're very important issues, but it's just a system that kind of looks after itself, right? Humans producing work, or Huawei's producing work, someone's buying that work, a museum then puts that work on, some point else, something else happens to that work. It sort of looks after itself, and doesn't feel strained, right? And I think at some times it does feel a little strained, particularly as we said, demand for funds and support, it has gone up exponentially, but the supply of that at some point reaches a point where it can't go any higher, particularly in an environment where public funding, Judith, you spend a lot of time with that, is really heading in the wrong direction around the world, right? So increased demand for funds, decreased supply of public funds, and therefore, bigger demands on private collectors. And then, in terms of then where do you allocate, your time and also, money, just thinking about that, that's when you get to this notion of sustainability, because there reaches a point when you'll see a demand for funding or support almost every single day of a week. Like if you put your hand up and say, hey, I'm handing out $100 bills, you get a lot of emails. And I think there, it then becomes very important to think about this notion of sustainability. But if you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different projects to look at supporting or artists to support, which ones are going to be there for the long run? And however good a flash in the pan or a one-off may seem, certainly from my perspective, at some point you've got to think about, allocating scarce resources and the things that are going to be around for a long time.
And Wari, so you're at Makers, you're an artist for 25 years. And what would you say are the most important things for a young artist to know at the start of their career?
Yes. So coming into art, it feels like it's something that you have to do and can't do anything else. So to a young artist, I would say, know that you're treading on a path that is possibly crazy, and you'd have to be audacious enough to go and push through that path and to accept that being an artist is a lot to do with precarity. Every step of the way is precarious. There's no guarantee to things. And if you're creating objects of value that comes from, as an artist, we always work with materials, but we're also trying to make physical what is transcendental, or an idea, into something that can be seen or touched or experienced. So that alone feels such a, like a position that it feels, am I going to be able to do this for the rest of my life? It's a big question. And then every step, speaking from my experience, is that knowing that precarity and accepting that is the first thing. And then along the way, I've also came to realize that it's all about relationships within myself as an artist, as a creator, and what I want to do with my art, and where I, what my art's purpose is, if I can summarize, is that. And then the gallery that is there, like Shane was mentioning, it's this trifecta of gallery, patron, and artist. But at the heart of it is really the work. There's no trifecta if there's no work. So this work is evolving, it's changing, it's shifting, and it could be venturing into the theaters of the unknown, the depths, the side, the front, the back. It's like all of us, the gallery, the artist, and the patron, seems to be like cohorts into navigating and taking a trip to the unknown. So that kind of I think that kind of relationship means that there's a complicity of, where are we going? This is only the work. It's hinging on the work all throughout. So the only responsibility for the artist, first and foremost, is to the work. And to what is your own stake at things, Because I would never be He-Man, and He-Man would be me, right? His language is different. My language is different. And the language evolves and gets to be more complex through time. And it's through the support of patrons that this language was able to grow. Because sometimes you have an idea and then you kill it because you can't fund it or you can't see the light of day. So that's when the support from patrons and the gallery kind of being the guide to do that really helps.
Yeah. And while we are being artists from the Philippines, how difficult was it to get funding and support compared with other countries? And I remember in our conversation you mentioned that discussion among your contemporaries feels almost a taboo, you described it. I'd just love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so the Philippines, in the scheme of things, we do have plenty to address. So the arts could be, not on top of mind. And we have made it into our strengths in a way. The artists from the Philippines, we always know how to do it DIY, kind of be resourceful in what we do with it. In fact, because of this situation, we have come up with many good works. But the reality also is the institutions that we have in Manila it's not robust enough, museums and institutions. Now we actually have a strong gallery ecosystem, and also the collectors and the patrons, and a lot of private as well. There are private collections that made their collections public through corporate collections and through other things. So to sum it up, like, Philippines is a growing economy. So this is something we are also, as artists, we are part of the greater Southeast Asia. So we've been many times interacting with our counterparts in Singapore and also in Hong Kong. Yeah.
So, Rory, I'd also love to hear more about your long-standing relationship with Silver Lens Gallery, which is actually how you two were introduced in the first place. And then, Shane, I'd love to hear for you about when you guys, can you remember the first time you were introduced?
Should I go first? Where's Gregor Muir? He was there a second ago. Oh, there he is. So, Gregor is, for those of you who don't know, is responsible for collections at Tate in London. And it was Gregor the first, and it wasn't a plant. I didn't know he was going to turn up. But Gregor at the Hong Kong Opera, I think, at Art Basel in Hong Kong, many years ago, introduced me to Silver Lens. And he said, I think at the time, this is the most important gallery. I can't remember whether it was Asia or Southeast Asia, or one of the most important. And so, that was my introduction to Silver Lens, was actually coincidentally here in Hong Kong, back in the day. That must have been like 7 or 8 years ago, whatever that was. And so, as we talked about earlier, I think very, very important that, being a collector, that obviously, it starts probably with a great relationship with a great gallery, which I've developed with Rachel and Lisa to run Silver Lens. And that's intense and that's deep. It's all around the world. They've got a wonderful space in Manila. They've got a wonderful space in New York. And I got to know them. I got to know their friends, and other patrons that they're working with, but also, of course, the artists as well. Right? And I think once you, develop that position of trust with a gallery, you then, of course, get to the stuff that's really important, which, of course, is the artists and the artwork. And, while we was lucky enough to see the work, obviously, before we met at a gallery in Manila a long time ago, and then I think the first time we met was in January last year in New York, which is while we had her show. And, the show was amazing. Great to meet Huawei. I think we went for lunch that day after she showed us around the show. And I think that an important part and a privilege of putting together any collection is actually to get to know the artists. Buying these objects and putting them on a wall or putting them somewhere is important. But for me, equally as important is actually developing an understanding of what that artist is trying to do, and then starting to appreciate the work. And is that piece more important than that piece? And that's always a question I often ask the artist, which is a bit silly question, but it's always good to get the answer. But it was because of Gregor, through the gallery, and then while we are following her show in London.
And Rory, how has this long-term relationship with Silver Lens Gallery supported you in your career?
Yeah, they're very early. Now we're going on 20 years together. They approached me in 2007 when I was just doing my darkroom stuff, and then I didn't know about the art world. I didn't know about anything bigger than what I was doing inside my little darkroom. And I remember Isa and Rachel approached me to do a show in Manila. They said, I remember it precisely, she said, we're not interested for one show. We're interested for the long haul. At that time, I didn't realize what that meant, but it really means to be an artist really about the time that you spend developing that relationship, and also the time developing the work to mature and to go into different things. While with Silver Lens, I was I was awarded by the Ateneo Art Awards and the Asian Cultural Council. So all these things kind of solidified my life as an artist, and then also to make it's also a learning experience, because what we do as artists, we just create. And then I didn't know collectors before. Collectors buy the work and that's it. Some of them do that. But patrons it's a deeper relationship. They want to know about the motivations and about where it comes from. I would say that it's a relationship that in a lot of ways built on trust, because sometimes the ideas will be so fragile in the beginning, and the patron, when I'm talking to patrons, like, okay, this is what I had in mind, and you don't show a deck to present what you're going to make. It's mostly because they know you, they know your previous work, they know your galleries, they know that kind of how do you call it, the milieu in which you operate. And at the get-go, it's very private because, of course, these ideas you don't share it to the public. So it's between the artist, the gallery, and the patron. And sometimes my relation with my patrons, I'm free enough to approach them personally and ask them from their end, how does this look like? You know, not even asking for funding right away. It's more of a feedback, like, what do you think? And then I'd get a perspective that I don't, I couldn't see from the other side. So yeah, it's really for the long haul, and everything else is about the work.
And Iriche, do you have any kind of ideas on how an artist get that balance right, a support between a patron and a gallery?
So you go.
How an artist get the balance between a support between a gallery and a patron?
What's the difference between the?
Or how to get the balance right?
Oh, for an artist or for? I think it's all. So I do think this is important, actually. I mean, again, if you sort of step back to real basics and look at roles and responsibilities, at the end of it, and we've had this conversation, actually, Ollie and I, because at the end of the day, the expectation from an artist, certainly my collector's expectation of an artist, is that they continue to produce great artwork, right? And that's really what you want to happen. And then at the same time, you've got the business end of that, which is the gallery. And what is their responsibility? Well, it is to put on shows, it's to sell art and, to manage, their artists and, hopefully move their careers forwards. And I do personally think that it's important to get those roles and responsibilities right. And while it's correct, I think a lot of artists, as they grow and, their practice just becomes bigger. There is, dialogue that happens, directly for, with them to the collectors that would ordinarily happen through galleries. But I think it's actually respectful or it's a good idea to respect the system. And, one thing for me personally is what I do not do is go to artists and buy work directly. Unless I have to, unless I don't have a gallery. I just think it's a bad practice, for a bunch of different reasons, not respecting the system. And so I like the idea of roles and responsibilities. And, I think it's important to respect that.
And we'd love to know, I mean, of course, patronage is not a new concept at all. It has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And are there any best examples from history that we can learn from today?
But you're right. I mean, it's definitely something that's been around for a while. What have we had? Leonardo da Vinci was that the Medicis, I think? And then, Peggy Guggenheim and Duchamp and Giacometti. And then, I mentioned also the Framlicks moving image work and their relationship with Matthew Barney. So you're right. It's at least been around for 500 years plus. And I suppose even before that, we've had the Romans and the Greeks. Someone was painting the ceilings and someone was paid for it. So in that sense, I don't think it's changed. And art is. It's the one thing that I think people do and people are interested in when they've, when they bought food, they found water, they heated their homes, and they've got their kids an education. You finally reach a point where, okay, well, then now I've done all that. I'll go out and, I go out and either buy some art or support our institutions. So, I think the system's been around forever. I think if you actually deconstruct it, it probably hasn't changed a great deal. And I think the only way I think about that is I do, as a collector, respect, those patrons of old, and really understand what was going on and how important that was.
And I've got to know, guys, like, have there been any highlights from your relationship? And Rory, how's your relationship with Shane especially helped your creativity, your career?
Yeah, I like having the exchange of perspectives because honestly, there are things that, for example, the practical things mostly, and the institutional things something that I learned from him. This part we've talked in Manila. I also enjoy a certain amount of freedom that with patrons, they don't really dictate what you do. They respect the artist's, capability to make their own decisions. So basically, that kind of, certain self-determination for an artist is important. So even if you have the gallery and the patron, it's meant to support it, but not meant to impinge on the artist's freedom to do something, to create.
Yeah, I got an answer to that. Well, when you asked Wally how I have influenced her creativity, I was hoping that she would say not in the least. And I certainly have never. It's a terrible idea.
Your math is really good than me.
Yeah, no, and it's really, really true. I give you an example of that actually. I mean that very, very sincerely. Yeah, that again, it gets back to the roles and responsibilities. I do not want to. I respect Wally. I respect her work because she is a fantastic artist. I do not have a creative bone in my body. I say sometimes I do not want to get involved in that process. At the fair yesterday, I was speaking to an artist, Tarak Aloui, who shows with Vitamin, and I've been working with the gallery and with Tarak just on some pieces that he's put together, and he had some performances in Hong Kong earlier in the week. And this is an ongoing project. He is building these musical instruments, and if you don't know the artist, I very strongly recommend you take a look at him and his practice. But he was telling me he's built something that's on at Vitamin Space in New Territories now, and at some point it's going to move from there into a space of mine. And he was saying, well, look, we put the wood up. We actually made it this color to suit the interior here. What would you like? What would you like when it actually goes to your home? I said, I've absolutely, I do not want to have any input into that. Whatever you would like is totally fine with me. And I think I'd say that many, many times, even when it comes to framing. What I would say is, how would the artist like that frame? That's good enough for me. I do not want to add any input whatsoever into that creative process. He mentioned Heman Chon. For those that don't know Heman, he's another fantastic artist from Singapore. I've got a lot of Heman's work. I mean, it's never. Whatever Heman would like, is good enough for me. Whatever Wally likes is good enough for me.
And have there been any highlights from your relationship, especially that Rory would like to share about from support with acquisition?
Oh, yeah. So recently, sometimes the patients are very sneaky because you don't know that they've helped with the acquisition on a museum, which I've learned recently, and we can't say it, right? So it's one of those things that move, in a massive way. Yeah, so this kind of, I would say solid show of trust. To me, it feels like rather than a transaction, it feels like a strong vote of confidence, and especially because I wasn't involved with that. The museum expressed interest to have my work, and then the museum contacted the gallery, and the gallery, made it happen through the patrons' gifting to the museum. And that's just one example. And then, of course, Shane buys artwork, and it means a lot also for artists to have that, because we all know that we create, and then the galleries have to find it support from the other side. And we're here at Art Basel, essentially to do that. Right.
And it's important to, I know it's sort of sometimes, it's convenient to separate out buying art and then not even sure people necessarily refer to art collectors as patrons always, but I mean, they are the patrons, right? So you can either support an artist in their practice by buying the artwork or by, Huawei is talking about a museum in New York that's actually going to, that's recently acquired work and, I helped out with that. But those two things are equally as important. One thing from a collector and would-be patron perspective, I sort of figured out as well the sort of utility of buying versus giving. I don't know whether it's 10 to 1, but if you buy a work for $10, that is you could gift $1 and sort of have the same sort of impact, because far fewer people are giving money away for what it's worth. And so you do tend to have more of an impact in the system by giving away money versus actually buying something. I'm not sure that logically holds up, but that's kind of how it works. But I think both are equally as important. And that's when, when it comes to commercial galleries, when it comes to art fairs, and when it comes to auction houses, obviously creating liquidity in that all well. I think they all have a very, very important role to play, different too, but not necessarily too far away from, giving money or patrons.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned I wanted to add something. Aside from the buying of the artwork, the acquisitions, the special place a patron has impacted my art practice is that the way that they make the future possible to make the works. Because this is something that you can't, there's no physical object, that they're going to buy. But as for the future, let's say a project or a series or something that is still not made, these things are not shared publicly, but only to trusted collector, trusted patrons, and to the gallery. So I would think that most of the ideas that belong to the future still, it's through support and that special relationship to be able to produce it, to move it, to basically make it a reality. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We have an absolutely packed audience here today, so I'm sure there might be some questions. So we just have to open up to the floor to see if anybody had any questions for Shane or Huawei.
Judith.
Yes, indeed. Hi, Shane and hi, Howie. For the last conversation, I thought it was interesting to hear both where you talk about the books of trust and relationships. And Shay, you're known as an exceptional collector around the world. And I think you really set a high standard. Although we'll buy art and you demonstrate the really best practice classic collector as far as under the stories. One of the things think are in an art fair right now, a lot of people who don't have their experience will be going around thinking, should I spend this much money on this work of art? Or if I buy this now, what will it be worth in 10 years? And that question of how do you determine value? How do you understand value outside of the monetary aspect of the works that you collect? And how can you also, I think it's also important what you were saying, artists become endorsed in a certain way within the system. They get their practice by being in nonprofit spaces, big and small galleries, being included in shows and biennials and institutions around the world. And you as a patron have often assisted that practice. How do you make that decision?
Well, I will say one thing. When I've known Judith for a few decades as well, and she was someone who we first met, God knows where, probably 90s, that I looked up to as also a fantastic collector and patron. So it's kind of you to say that about me, but I think I probably learned a little bit from you along the way. I think it's changed, and again, think about that notion of supply and kind of what's going on at the moment. It is very, 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 very difficult to attribute intrinsic value to artwork, and I think a great starting point is not at all attempt to do that. Because that's inevitably a bad idea. And I think something that's becoming increasingly more complicated and more difficult. And it's a bit of a cliche to say, hey, first of all, park that for one moment. And if you're ever speaking to a gallery or anyone or an advisor that's telling you buy this because it's a great investment and it's a new hot thing and this and the other, it's a red flag and it's very likely to go morally wrong. So I wouldn't. If you want to do that, go and buy Nvidia shares like everyone a dick. That's a better idea. But I think it is all to do with how do you do that in a more sensible way. And I think it is. It's if you want something that's pretty to go up on your wall, then just buy something that's pretty and put that up on the wall. If you actually want to go a little deeper than that, then take the time to choose the right galleries, first of all, because I think a lot of these things are relationships for the long ball. Do some homework. There's some great galleries, obviously, at the fair. All of the galleries here are great, including some of the ones we mentioned, Silver Lens and Stadia as the two examples. But choose the right gallery. Take the time or spend the time with them to actually get to know their program, get to know the artists within that program, and then once you've honed in on some artists, if you like, then start to hone in on the work, the parts of the practice for those artists belonging to that gallery that you actually like. And at that point, it doesn't matter how much money you're spending, you will likely be spending money certainly in a more intelligent way. You probably got a little bit more out of it. That artist ends up being, moving forward and becoming, more famous or doing well, irreparably, then that's fantastic. But if not, you've bought the work for the right reasons, and you've supported, the right practice, the right artist, again for the right reason. So don't do it for money.
Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm from Jakarta. I just recently worked in an art fair from Indonesia. So it's been a fun 1 year from here. So yeah, I just started being in the industry itself. It's very different when you are outside as an art lover. My question would be, how to build the connection between artists or gallery with younger generations? As you mentioned before, like we as a Gen Z, Gen Alpha, we have a different preference, and I think for gallery and artists or even patron, I think they need to have a different approach for the standardization. So in your point of view, what would the best approach into? So
I think, I think, from my perspective, it's like anything. You can't force it. I mean, I think that it's like being gregarious or not, right? Being a people person or not. I think you've got to decide that, hey, that's something you would enjoy doing, is developing those relationships. From my perspective, whether or not it's with a gallery or whether or not it's with an artist. I personally think when it comes to collecting and support, it's a good idea. It's very rewarding. And another thing, at some point, certainly collecting and supporting a practice, it's actually as much about the concept of doing that as it is what you're bringing home, right? So, and I think we sort of touched on that. So, there's a lot more to collecting, supporting, and being engaged in the art world than just actually taking something that looks good home and putting it on your wall, right? So I think it's an integral part of, support and collecting, but it's not for everybody. My son loves watching soccer and American football. As much as he likes doing that, it's not for me. I don't think I've ever watched a game in my life. It barely had, So personal preference. I don't think you can force it, but if you're interested in this world and you have the time or the opportunity to do that, it's rewarding, and you end up in a good place.
On my end, I'd see consistency would be important for everyone involved, because we're all here. We're years deep into this, whether you're an art gallery, an artist, or someone you said from the outside. So show up, learn more, talk to the gallerists, talk to the artists, and if you have the chance, attend those parties and have fun and then talk to people. Because we're all people. Then before we realize it's 10 years have passed. Yeah, so it's not overnight for sure, but consistency would be important.
I think just one final thing on that. I think very well, you add to this for another one of Gregor's phrases. The art world generally is a pretty small place, right? I mean, you could walk around this fair and bump into, there's dozens, if not probably hundreds of great artists that are at this fair, and some in this audience. For us, if you're remotely interested in this world, it's a fantastic opportunity. And I can't remember, Gregor, who the artist was, but it might have been Joe Jonas. And Gregor was saying, one day we're going to look back and say, my God, I can't believe we have the opportunity to sit down and have dinner with Joe Jonas, right? And I think this week in Hong Kong, everybody in this room could have done that with at least a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen names. And that, I think, is priceless. There's not many pastimes in the world, whether it be sport, whether it be fashion, whether it be motor racing, where you have the opportunity to do that, right? And that I view as a very, very privileged position.
Thank you so much. I did probably got time for 1 or 2 more. Anything?
It's going to be a very quick one. It's really directly to Mr. Shane. So I'm a very young collector. I've only been collecting for 11 years. It's really your advice I'm looking for. From my perspective, I could see that, especially it's integral to great experience in art and access to art to areas that does not happen, right? With a lot of areas, it's not happen. So I was born in China. I'm trying to, I've been, for the past few years trying to work on build a physical institution in a part of China that does not have access to contemporary art in any kind of Western sense. I find it very difficult to find the right structure for that. Of course, having a physical space is obviously reasonable. But meanwhile, I wondered, since you have already made the first step of making Harvard Collection and public, having this amazing channel of internet, but again, someone have to be aware of you, be aware of your website, and that's all privileged knowledge you might have. So what more do you think that people like us can do, right? Who have the privilege, have knowledge, have the access somehow to be able to bring it to the wider public that does not even know this exists, right? Up there, Basel. So that's something I'm trying to find answers for. Maybe you can draw.
I think there's a couple of points I think that are kind of unrelated but important. Number one is whatever one does is respect to various limitations that are actually in place that are kind of that you are dealing with respect to, right? And how one behaves in various parts of the world, I think, is different. What one is able to do, what one has access to, and money is a big function of this, right? If you've got more money, you've got access to more things. If you've got less money, you've got access to fewer things. So I think the first thing is to do is, with collecting and support life, maybe generally realize, what are the limitations? What are the variables you are dealing with respect to? Because they're kind of fixed. There's nothing you can do about that, right? And so, I'm trying to think of a big thing. I'd love to get a gigantic, the best Charaga painting that there is out there, but maybe I can't afford it. So I don't buy that. So respect those limitations, I think, is the first thing. And there's a number of those. I think the second thing that's probably unrelated is, be object orientated. It's all very well to say, well, look, I'm interested in this, I'm interested in that, or I'm interested in this, and that may be making a collection, public or available. But I spend a hell of a lot of time thinking about what does that actually mean? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And sometimes that objective actually moves a bit. And if I look at the the part of my collection that I'd made available online through that website, and now I was trying to realize that in a more public way. I sometimes wake up and think, God, why am I wasting money on this? Because it costs hundreds of thousands a year to just, put the website together and pay people to do that. I'm not that interested in that, quite frankly. And then there's maybe the notion of PR and putting that out there and getting it out, which I think if you're doing something, there's an element of that you have to do. That also doesn't really interest them by actually making a bit of a noise about the collection. I certainly don't want to do that about myself. So I think, respect the limitations, but also be very much object orientated. Like, what do you really want to do? Why do you want to do it? And then sort of work backwards from there, and that helps. And it can change, right? I think my objectives with some of this thing, they develop certainly all the time. So, and that becomes the fun of it. At the moment, it becomes as much conceptual, like how do we really move this forward, and what does being available mean, and what does collective moving image mean? All of these things are sort of as interesting at some point as the works that I'm buying.
Well, guys, thank you so much. I think that's all we have to wait for.